And it's tough for those guys. Now, later this hour, we're going to be talking to Police Association President Greg O'Connor. We've also been the focal point of a lot of information. We get a lot of texts, a lot of emails. People are venting their spleen, their angst on air. And we're happy to do that because we're here. We're here for you. And as part of that, people ring and they say, "How are you, Dan?" And the next caller comes through and says, "How are you, Dan? How are you, Dan?" And I say, "I'm well, I'm fine." Well, I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to be brutally honest, I'm not well and I'm not fine. You see, I've just received, in a roundabout way, the thoughts and words from an ambulance officer in Christchurch. I've eliminated some of what has been delivered to me, but these are the thoughts and words, unedited, and they may upset you. They are disturbing, but it's the truth. And it's a truth that I think we need to hear, New Zealand, because it might put us into a place where we know we desperately need to help our family in Christchurch. I was sitting down studying. That's when the quake hit. My weighted down plasma screen went first and it just exploded. I tried to stand up and flown to the ground. Everything was broken. Checked on the neighbours, threw everything I could to think of into the car, the dogs, and off I went to work. All the roads, just devastation. It took me 45 minutes to travel the 7 Ks into the city. Flashing lights, my lights and hazards still took that long. Got to the station. It was condemned. Inundated with over a foot of mud. Just a handful of us there initially went off to the triage centre in Latimer Square. On the way we saw utter devastation. Cars that were obviously occupied, totally flattened. Obvious deaths. Thankfully, a medical conference was on nearby, meaning when we got to the square, there was excellent coordination. Bodies were being piled up in one corner, and as one of the higher qualified officers on the scene, I was given a status 2 patient to assess. She had fallen from the top of the CTV building to the ground. After a nightmare drive to hospital, we returned to Latimer Square, where more and more resources were arriving. I became a triage officer, deciding who was savable and who wasn't. At the same time, the CTV building was burning just in front of me, and I was being water bombed because there was no retriculation. It was unbelievable, with the smoke, the flame, the alarms, the sirens, the helicopters, and the screams. The church opposite then collapsed, following a large aftershock, narrowly missing a number of the fire and ambulance vehicles. Drugs were at a premium. Patients were arriving from everywhere. We were not allowed into the cordons because of the pleas by bystanders. People were dragged out, carried out on doors, on shutters. Most injuries were severe, massive crush injuries. The smoke from the CTV was so bad we were nearly evacuated several times. Police were letting family members inside the cordons to approach, to look for their mum, their dad, their brother. I kept rotating through the roles until I was tasked to accrue a transport ambulance. After a while, we went mobile. I heard a call come in from an unknown incident in Cambridge Terrace. Responded. As we tried to make our way through the broken buildings and streets, a report came through that there were multiple trapped. On arrival, I later discovered that it was the PGG building. A crew had arrived on the scene some 4 hours earlier and had been trying to manage with minimal resources and without communications. No one knew they were there. They had already experienced horrific sights you cannot imagine. One held a man, gave him his cell phone so he could ring his wife. He told her he loved her. Then he died. Another colleague was faced with a horribly entrapped man. There is no way he could be saved, while we watched on hopelessly and helplessly, and he slipped away through his horrible suffering. Our first patient brought out was a beautiful 20-year-old girl. Her spine had been shattered. She was contorted horribly and was paralysed. She was in irreversible shock and lost consciousness as we went. I fought so hard with the surgeon to keep her alive. She didn't make it. Our last patient had been pinned for some time by his legs. Crews from Addington and St Albans, together with 2 others, did every damn thing they could do to get him out. In the end, a surgeon had to amputate both his legs in situ. We waited desperately to get him into the vehicle. I drove as fast as I could on appalling roads that we could later not return on. He died as we arrived in hospital. In the meantime, another man had been pinned by his legs by a massive beam. We arranged to uplift all the necessary drugs to prevent crush syndrome. When we returned to him, he was gone. The rain started. We were replaced. I wanted to stay, but by now was purely working automatically. I returned to the square to sign out and got taken back to my car, which was now surrounded by liquefaction. I returned home briefly to gather some more things, then went off to a friend's house. He goes on to say that he got very little sleep. He then goes on to say that most bridges in the eastern part of the city are impassable. There was only one bridge open and some of the streets completely inaccessible due to liquefaction. You simply can't drive or walk in this stuff. He goes on and talks about some other feelings that we don't need to know about, but he does say at the supermarket, people had begun fighting over food and space at the checkout. I just want to go home. If I could get my dogs to safety, I'd be a lot happier. I don't really want to live in Christchurch anymore, but I can't, and I'm not going to quit my job. I want to be at work now. They've told me not to come in today, to have some rest. Maybe I'll feel a bit better soon. I don't think we could have done anything differently. I'm very proud of what I did. I just feel numb, and I've had very little sleep. I'm so sorry to unload this all on you. I don't know what the next few days will bring, or if we will have some more success. That's an ambulance officer on the ground in Christchurch.